Alright, you wanna fuck with me? You wanna make me read a fucking site? You're gonna regret that because my thing is questioning people, and I've already read through some of this, and there's a lot of fucking questions to ask. There's a lot to question you about. The global flood of Noah's, and by the way, I didn't feel like changing the screen, so if you don't like that, it's your fucking problem. Noah's day was the direct judgment of a just God. Okay, the first problem here, right in the first sentence, is why does God need to be a judge, and why do you approve of God being a judge? Why does an almighty being need to judge? That's a human thing, is it not? Do we get it right? No. But we're not omnipotent. We're not omnipotent either, though. The Bible says the flood wiped out people and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds, everything that breathed there. Wait, some people today are offended by the flood story, saying it is proof of God's injustice, arbitrariness, or just plain meanness, and I would agree. Now, who am I to agree with that? A guy who understands that God is supposed to be all powerful, created the life that he's just manipulating. And I'll get into more of that later when talking about Adam and Eve. And murder, whether calling for the murder or conspiring the murder or doing it himself, didn't solve the problem, because obviously there's a lot of violence going on today. Then he's being no better than man. You can say that God. Oh, I'll get to that later. They accuse the Bible of promoting a temperamental God who judges indiscriminately, and say that only a bully would drown everyone, including children and all those innocent animals. Okay, later it says that the violence is the reason for all this. So children were being violent and so were animals. Animals only behave as they do because they're animals. It's a predator and prey world. That's all they ever do. Such attacks on the character of God are nothing new. Attacks? Who's attacking God or his character? So people can only be attacking God. They can't just criticize him. A lot of Christians would say people are insulting God, but I don't see how anybody can insult God. He's just he's a mafia boss of a being, of a creator, as you guys believe he exists. As long as there have been sinners in the world. Okay, well, here's the thing. As I already replied to you, which is why I was asking about Adam and Eve, how could sin happen in God's holy land, which would be the paradise, the Garden of Eden? It doesn't make any sense. Adam and Eve were direct creations of God, and they were in God's presence. Now, of course, I would need a definition from you for sin, which many Christians would define as absence of God. And if that's your understood definition of sin, then how could Adam and Eve have fucked up in God's presence? Meaning there's no sin there. It can't exist. Which would therefore mean there was no reason to ever punish Adam and Eve and banish them from the Garden of Eden, which is what you guys claim to cause or bring the sin into this world, the evil, quote unquote. Aside from that, Adam and Eve didn't make the banishment decision themselves. That was God's doing. So by that logic, God is the one that caused it all. Not us. It's not our fault. It's his. God's fault. I don't see how sin could happen in the Garden of Eden. A Christian I was in communication with was telling me that first, God had laws, and secondly, God gave Adam and Eve a choice. Choice is the big thing with you Christians. Now, why would God need laws if he's almighty? And the Garden of Eden is supposed to be this utopia, paradise or whatever. Sinless world, holy land. And why would God make Adam and Eve make a choice? How would that be a paradise? And also, how can any of the options be sinful if sin can't exist in this world, this Garden of Eden, this paradise. With that said, okay, moving on here. There have been charges that God is unjust. Consider Adam's subtle shifting of blame when asked about eating the fruit. Adam said, the woman you put me here with. Okay, this is another problem I have with this article. First it says it was the woman's fault, but blaming God did not mitigate. Who blamed God? It went from saying in the same sentence that it was first the woman's fault, then blaming God. What the fuck is going on there? And calling God unjust for sending the... Again though, how did the flood solve anything? And how... Now you're trying to say... This article is trying to say God is just no matter what he does, just and righteous. He can do whatever he wants. So, with that, how can man... Where does... If man was created in God's image, what does that mean exactly? I should get your explanation of that too. What does God's image mean exactly? Get the fuck out of here. The flood of Noah's day has many counterparts in history. God judged the people of Canaan with a command to wipe them out. So God judged the people of Canaan with a command to wipe them out. Who did he command to wipe them out? Well, that doesn't really fucking matter. So God judged them and called for their genocide. So that's mass murder. Now, it says here, he gave a command, which means God didn't directly do it himself, but he did call for it. That would be mafia-like behavior. Now, do you approve of mafia? And if so, how the fuck could you be moral? And again, how does that solve the problem of violence? Violence against violence? Really? The only reason I would ever kill somebody, or I guess maybe murder somebody, but you seem to have this thing about me conflating those two words. I don't know what the fuck that's about, but the only reason I would ever kill somebody is out of self-defense, or if I knew that if I saw a person about to act against somebody else. Those are the only two instances where I would ever do that. If I knew somebody was a danger, I'd put them out somehow. Fortunately, neither has ever happened in my life, and hopefully never will. Because I would never take pride in killing somebody, and I wouldn't feel good about it. But it would, whatever. He similarly judged Sodom and Gomorrah. He does a lot of judging now. Again, why do you approve of judgment? Why does an almighty God need to judge anybody? I mean, he set the parameters. He called the shots here. He created the situation, the circumstances. And the final judgment before the great white throne will result in all the wicked from all time being cast into the lake of fire. Okay, now how is this righteous and just? And what does that solve? I mean, that's permanent, and it's forever. It never ends. That's worse than fucking murder on any level. You could say, well, God is he's incapable of evil or being unjust and whatever. What would be unjust if this is righteous and just? Explain that. Now, understand, I'm not saying, how would God be unjust? What would unjust alone be, not God being unjust? I don't know. I don't know how else I would be able to ask that question. The plain message of the Bible is that God judges sin. Again, how can sin exist based on the premises I've just explained earlier, or questioning you, whether by an invading army by fire or in brimstone, or by a catastrophic global flood. The flood was just because God commanded it. That's a fallacy. It's just appealing to God's authority. You're all about trying to dismiss my shit as everything I fucking say is a fallacy of some sort. Well, there you go. God commanding it doesn't make it just. Or, well, explain how it does. The Lord is upright and there is no wickedness in him. Again, so what would be wicked in general if either murder is righteous and just along with casting into the lake of fire or hell? Righteousness and justice are the foundation of God's throne. Would they need to be? If God was the responsible creator and made us all invincible and immortal? Answer that question. God always does what is right. Would he need to? Would anything ever need to be done? Again, God created Adam and Eve, which makes them not sinners, just like Jesus Christ, right? They're in the paradise, they're in God's presence, or did God abandon them? It doesn't make any sense, dude. His decrees and judgments are always blah 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 blah. It's not even explaining anything. Well, the subtitle alone is a fallacy, as I've just explained. So anyway, moving on here. The flood was just because mankind was evil. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Now, what caused that exactly, if that's the case? And how could it be based on the premises of the Garden of Eden I've just explained? All the points I've just made. Explain that. We cannot fully imagine the extent of the wickedness of that day. Yeah, flood's pretty rough. Did people enjoy the flood? Did people want to die? Did that solve the violence? Obviously not, because today's world is violent. And the majority of the world is Christian, by the way, including yourself. But yet, I'm obligated to justify my moral position that killing illegal immigrants is immoral. Because I'm an atheist, and you insist that that's a worldview and is linked to morality, which I've told you over and over again that it is not. And you've already rejected my dictionary-provided definition as basic. Whatever the fuck that means. Thinking that your provided references are all superior to anything I could possibly say. As you insist that I read all these ridiculous fucking articles about your shit, which means you either cannot or refuse to think for yourself, while I've realized for myself that morality is psychological and not either subjective or objective. While I've also figured out for myself that arguing facts is useless, and that questioning is the key because you motherfuckers never listen. In the beginning, a few days ago, your first few replies you told me that I'm rambling and I'm just arguing lazily against Christianity, which I'm not. I'm questioning. I do not argue. I explain X or Y when necessary, but I don't argue. Get that through your thick motherfucking skull, pal. You want to keep fucking with me? This is what's going to happen to you. Trying to undermine my position as fallacy or loaded question or what the fuck ever is nothing. We have never seen the like. The evil was great. And every thought of everyone's heart. This whole article is garbage based on the premises I've laid out earlier. If man was evil, it's because God made him that way. Sin could not have happened in the Garden of Eden. for the points I've just explained to you twice now, or 2 or 3 times now. Okay, one problem was the rampant violence. The earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. Well, wait a minute. God is present here too. So how the fuck could this be? This means God is not immunity from sin or evil. God is fucking evil. You're just blaming it on people. Which is how I realized that we all know that we're all mortal and vulnerable to the world and to the planet. You're never going to blame God because he's the creator and also the one with the way to heaven. So, of course you're not going to blame him. That's why he needed Adam and Eve. That's why he created them. And that's why Jesus Christ was necessary to provide the path and to convince you you're all guilty. Because Adam and Eve, that's how that works. It's a fallacy? Okay, explain how it's a fucking fallacy then, asshole. The descendants of Cain, the first murderer, was abounding in bloodshed. Another evil among the antediluvians was occult sexuality. I don't even know what that is. Occult sexuality. Define occult. Yeah, the flood was just because all sin was a capital offense. How can God be offended? And what does this violence even have to do with him? If God doesn't like their violence, that's his fucking problem. I mean, when was the lake of fire created? He's almighty. Why can't he just wave his hand or something, make them all stop being violent without killing them? Making him no fucking better, of course. You'll disagree with that, but who cares what you think? Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that.